Emily Carter had always imagined that change would be like flipping a switch. One moment, her life was one way, full of predictable routines, the echo of past mistakes, and the weight of heartbreak pressing down on her chest. And the next moment, she would step into a new city and everything would feel light, fresh, and unburdened. She had believed that moving to Savannah, Georgia, would give her that relief. She pictured the charming streets, the old brick buildings, and the cobblestones beneath her feet as a kind of therapy, a bridge to a calmer, quieter life. Her apartment was small, perched on a quiet street just a block from Bay Street. The building itself was old, its brick walls weathered and softened by decades of humid southern air. The windows rattled faintly when the wind blew through the Spanish moss hanging from the oaks outside. At first, Emily worried she had traded one kind of chaos for another, but the city had a way of soothing her without her realizing it. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant laughter from a nearby bar, the faint scent of salt from the Savannah River. All of it combined into something oddly comforting, a rhythm she hadn't felt since leaving Atlanta. She spent her first few days exploring Savannah in the daylight. There were the historic squares, each framed with towering oaks draped in gray moss, the iron fences curling like delicate lace, and fountains that splashed quietly, almost apologetically, into the warm spring air. Emily wandered along River Street, fascinated by the old warehouses that now housed cafes and shops selling antiques, jewelry, and art. She admired the way the cobblestones creaked under her feet, the tiny imperfections that whispered of centuries gone by. But it wasn't the daylight that called to her. It was the night. From the first evening, Emily felt drawn to the riverfront. There was a weight to the air at night, a density that seemed to carry memories and whispers. She would leave her apartment after dinner, sometimes after long stretches of staring at her laptop, sometimes after pacing the small rooms of her apartment in restless anxiety. The streets were quieter then, save for the occasional late-night jogger or the echo of a car's tires against the worn pavement. Street lamps flickered softly, casting pools of light that shimmered across the damp cobblestones. The fog often rolled in from the river, curling and twisting like smoke, masking the city in a veil of mystery. Emily liked to sit on the old wooden bench closest to the water. Its paint was chipped and worn, revealing layers of previous colors and countless nights of weathering. She would tuck her knees to her chest, wrap her arms around them, and let her thoughts drift like the river itself. The water reflected the city lights in uneven streaks, like broken glass, and occasionally a ship's horn would sound, echoing across the river and settling deep in her chest. There was a rhythm to it, a gentle, mournful pulse that seemed to match her own heartbeat. It was during those first nights that she began to feel the city differently. She noticed the small details others might overlook, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional flutter of a bird disturbed from its perch, the way the mist rolled along the river and clung to the street lamps like delicate threads. There was a kind of magic here, Emily realized, a sense that this place remembered everything, even the things that had long been forgotten. And then one night, she first noticed him. He was sitting on a bench a little farther down the riverfront, a figure outlined against the faint glow of a lamplight, tall, dark-haired, wearing a white shirt with sleeves rolled up neatly at the elbows. He looked almost unreal. Emily thought he might be a local resident, someone who had made a habit of wandering the streets at night. But when their eyes met, something shifted. There was a softness in his gaze, a faint smile that suggested understanding, a kind of gentle recognition that made Emily feel as though she had known him for far longer than a single night. She looked away, feeling a flush creep over her cheeks, and continued her walk along the river. Yet, no matter how far she walked, she could feel his gaze lingering, following her movements, a quiet presence just beyond the corner of her mind. Over the next few nights, she began to see him again, always around the same hour, though she never knew exactly when. Sometimes he was seated on the same bench, hands folded over his knees, gazing silently at the water. Other nights she would arrive first, and he would appear from the fog, stepping silently onto the cobblestones as if materializing from the mist itself. Emily tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he worked nearby. Perhaps he liked the solitude. Perhaps he was as drawn to the river as she was. And yet, There was something in the way he moved, the subtle way his eyes seemed to track her even when she looked away, that unsettled her. It was not fear exactly, but a sense of profound unfamiliarity. A gentle tug on her consciousness, as if the night itself was trying to warn her of something she could not yet understand. During the daytime, Emily walked Savannah's streets with a different awareness. She would notice the old warehouses along River Street, the wrought iron balconies, the tiny cafes tucked into the corners of alleyways. She would pause by fountains in the historic squares, listening to the water, feeling the faint vibration of the city under her feet, and sometimes she would catch glimpses of him, or at least a shadow where he might have been, and a strange shiver would run through her. She began to carry a small notebook with her, sketching the riverfront, the fog patterns, the shapes of shadows cast by street lamps. At first, the drawings were simple, but as nights passed, they became more detailed, capturing not just the physical forms but the atmosphere, the feeling of being watched, the subtle shift of the wind, the ripple of the water. Her hands would tremble slightly as she sketched, her heart hammering when she sensed his presence nearby. And then, one night he spoke. "You always come here so late," he said, his voice low and calm, carrying across the water. Emily turned sharply, startled, her notebook slipping slightly in her hands. I like the quiet," she replied, unsure why her voice sounded so small. He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "It suits you." They exchanged names, Daniel Hayes. He claimed to have lived in Savannah all his life, though he said little about family, work, or home. He had a quiet, gentle presence that made Emily feel both comforted and wary. Something about him seemed timeless. In the nights that followed, Emily found herself thinking about him constantly. Every decision to leave the apartment, every step toward the riverfront, was fueled by a growing anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. She began noticing the little things about him, the way his gaze lingered on the water, the careful way he placed his hands when speaking, the softness in his voice when he told a story or shared a memory. But Emily also noticed oddities. Daniel never carried a phone, never suggested meeting during the day, and often disappeared without explanation. Once, she tried to follow him along Factor's Walk, the narrow alleyways by the warehouses, but he vanished as though swallowed by the fog. Other times, his reflection in the water lingered too long, blurred at the edges, shimmering faintly like it was not entirely real. Emily found herself caught between fascination and unease. She could not stop thinking about him, yet part of her mind nagged that something was off. And as the nights passed, the city itself seemed to take notice. The wind carried faint whispers. The fog thickened with an almost deliberate pattern. Even the distant hum of the river seemed to pulse with life. The fog that night was unusually thick, wrapping around the old warehouses and lampposts like a velvet shroud. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, feeling the chill seep through the fabric despite the warm spring air. She had been walking the riverfront every night for a week now, each time lingering a little longer on her favorite bench, letting the river and fog pull her thoughts away from the tangled memories of her life in Atlanta. But tonight felt different. The air smelled heavier, and every sound, the distant echo of a ship horn, the gentle lapping of water against the docks, the occasional rustle of leaves, seemed amplified, deliberate, almost sentient. And then she saw him. Daniel Hayes stood a few benches down, hands tucked casually into his pockets, his dark hair curling slightly in the damp air. He looked toward the river, his face serene, and when their eyes met, he gave her a small, knowing smile. Emily's pulse quickened. She had seen him before, yes, but tonight, something in the fog made him seem more present, more alive than ever, yet not entirely tethered to the world around her. She hesitated, wondering if she should approach, or if the night itself was holding her back. But curiosity won, as it always did, and she began walking toward him. Each step on the cobblestones echoed faintly, mingling with the soft sounds of the river, until she was close enough to hear his voice above the gentle lapping of water. "You came early tonight," Daniel said, his voice low, smooth, carrying a hint of amusement. Emily smiled nervously. I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "The city, It feels different at night. Quieter. Safer somehow. Daniel tilted his head slightly, as if studying her, though his expression was gentle. Safer, perhaps. But there's also truth in the quiet. Sometimes it reveals more than the day ever could. Emily paused, unsure how to respond. His words struck something deep within her, a resonance she couldn't quite identify. She sat down on the bench beside him, careful to maintain a polite distance, yet feeling inexplicably drawn closer. For several moments, neither spoke. The river stretched out before them, a black ribbon of water reflecting the dim light of the lampposts. The fog curled and twisted, creating shapes that seemed almost human, almost alive. Emily could hear her own breathing, shallow, nervous, and somehow in sync with the soft rhythm of the water. "You come here often," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence. Yes," Emily replied. "It helps me think or forget." He nodded, understanding, though his eyes betrayed something else, a depth of knowing that unsettled her. "I come here too," he said, "but not for the same reasons. I'm waiting." Emily's brow furrowed. Waiting? For what? Daniel's lips curved into that same small, almost sad smile. For someone who will see me. For someone who will notice me when no one else can. She felt a shiver run down her spine. There was an intensity to him, a gravity that was both alluring and frightening. And yet, despite a vague sense of wrongness, she wanted to understand, to know more. In the nights that followed, Emily and Daniel continued to meet along the riverfront. Each encounter unfolded slowly, deliberately, like a dance where neither knew the steps but both were attuned to the rhythm. They talked about trivial things at first, the pattern of fog rolling over the river, the way the moonlight glinted off the water, the distant sounds of the city carried by the night air. Gradually, the conversations deepened. Daniel spoke of Savannah as though he had lived 1,000 lives there, recounting stories of the old river docks, sailors who had disappeared mysteriously, merchants who vanished without a trace. Emily listened, enthralled, her heart beating faster with every word. There was a sadness in his stories, a longing, and yet he spoke of it with a kind of reverence, a gentleness that made her ache with unspoken emotion. Emily began to notice oddities, subtle at first. Daniel's shadow did not always move as it should. Sometimes when she glanced at the river's reflection, his image lingered too long, blurred at the edges, shimmering faintly, as if not fully part of the world. Once she thought she saw him vanish into the mist entirely, only to reappear moments later as if he had never been gone. Despite these strange occurrences, Emily found herself drawn deeper into his presence. Nights she had once spent wandering alone, lost in her thoughts, now passed in conversation and quiet laughter. She began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. A tentative, fragile hope that the loneliness she carried could be shared, even if only with this enigmatic figure by the river. One night, as the fog thickened into a nearly tangible wall of gray, Emily arrived at the bench to find Daniel waiting, his figure half hidden in the mist. She noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow darting across the docks, though there was no one there. The air seemed heavier, charged with a silent energy. "You feel it too, don't you?" Daniel said softly as though reading her thoughts. "What?" Emily asked, though she already knew. "The quiet, the presence, the way the city itself watches us when no one is looking." Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to question him, to ask him who he really was, why he never spoke of the day, why he disappeared, but words failed her. The night, the river, the fog, it all seemed to pulse around them in rhythm with their heartbeats. On another night, Emily brought her small notebook and began sketching the riverfront and the swirling fog. She tried to capture the shapes, the reflections, the feeling of being watched by something unseen. Daniel watched her silently, his gaze soft, almost tender. "You see the world differently," he said. "I envy that." Emily looked up at him, her chest tightening. "Why?" "Because you live in it," he said, fully. "And some of us don't get that chance anymore." His words sent a shiver through her. She wanted to laugh, to brush it off as dramatic. but she couldn't. Something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, made her feel the truth pressing against her chest. Daniel was not ordinary. He was not like anyone she had ever met, and yet, despite the unease, Emily continued to return night after night. She could not resist the pull of the river, the fog, the quiet companionship of Daniel Hayes. Each night, the suspense grew, the mystery deepened, and the connection between them tightened like an invisible thread, pulling her closer to something she could not yet comprehend. A truth hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. The nights in Savannah began to take on a rhythm of their own. Emily arrived at the riverfront with a sense of anticipation that had grown impossible to ignore. Each step along the cobblestone streets carried both excitement and unease. The air was thick with the scent of salt and old wood, and the fog had a life of its own, curling around lampposts and slipping through cracks in the warehouses like smoke searching for a home. Daniel was always there, waiting, though never in the same exact spot. Sometimes he stood by the old iron railing near the docks, hands resting lightly on the cold metal. Other nights, he appeared on the wooden benches closer to the water, his gaze fixed on the reflections rippling in the river. Emily began to notice small oddities that no one else could explain. A shadow that moved independently of him, footsteps that seemed to echo behind her, only to vanish when she turned. The faint sound of laughter carried on the wind, though she was certain she was alone. "You've been quiet tonight," Daniel observed one evening, his voice carrying softly through the fog. I was just thinking," Emily replied, her words hesitant. "About the city, about everything," he nodded as if he understood. "The river remembers," he said. "It holds all the stories of those who walked its banks, those who left too soon, those who never left at all." Emily shivered. She wasn't sure whether it was the chill of the night or the weight of his words. She had begun to feel that the riverfront was alive in a way that she had never noticed before, as if it were listening, observing, waiting for her to uncover its secrets. Over the next few nights, subtle anomalies became impossible to ignore. Once, she saw Daniel sitting across the river, even though he had been beside her moments before. The reflection in the water did not align with the figure she saw in reality. On another night, she felt a soft brush against her arm, like fingertips. But no one was there. The fog seemed to move with intention, curling around her shoulders, whispering her name, carrying faint echoes of Daniel's voice even when he was silent. Emily tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was her imagination. Perhaps the city's history, the river's restless flow, and the misty nights were simply playing tricks on her mind. Yet the pull of Daniel's presence was undeniable. She found herself returning night after night, drawn not only to the riverfront but to him, to the mystery he embodied. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the first stars began to prick the sky, Emily noticed a small neglected cafe tucked between two warehouses. She had never seen it in daylight. The sign, faded and swinging gently in the breeze, read, "The Lantern." Curiosity sparked within her, and she stepped inside. The cafe smelled of old books, coffee, and something faintly sweet that she couldn't identify. An elderly man behind the counter looked up and smiled faintly. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. His voice was warm but carried the weight of years. "No," Emily replied. "I just moved here." He nodded knowingly. "The riverfront draws some of us in. Some more than others." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "The river remembers those who walk its banks, especially at night. Some of them don't leave when their time comes." He paused, his eyes studying hers. "If you talk to a stranger there, be careful. Not all of them are like you think." Emily left the cafe with a chill running down her spine. She wondered if he meant Daniel. Part of her hoped he did not, yet part of her dreaded the answer. That night when she arrived at the riverfront, Daniel was already there, leaning against the iron railing, watching the water. "You went to the Lantern," he said quietly, as if he had been waiting for her answer. "Yes," Emily admitted. "A man there. He said some things. About the river and not all who walk it leave." Daniel's gaze softened. "He speaks the truth, and yet, some of us linger for a reason." Emily's chest tightened. "A reason?" He nodded. "To be seen. To be remembered." and sometimes to love. Those words struck Emily in a way she could not articulate. She wanted to reach out to him, to touch, to confirm he was real, but hesitation gripped her. The fog thickened, swirling around them as though listening to every heartbeat. She noticed again the subtle anomalies. A ripple in the water where no wind stirred. A fleeting shadow that did not match his form. Over the following nights, Emily began to observe more closely. She noted the changes in Daniel's presence, the inconsistencies in the reflection on the water, the faint glow that sometimes surrounded him in the fog. She began keeping a journal of these occurrences, sketches, and notes, documenting every minute detail. Her sketches captured more than the physical forms. They held the atmosphere, the tension, and the fleeting ghostly phenomena that accompanied Daniel's presence. Then came the night she saw him vanish entirely. She had approached the usual bench, fog thick around her, the city silent except for the distant echo of the river. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. She called his name, her voice trembling. The fog swirled unnaturally, curling around the lampposts and docks, carrying faint whispers that sounded like echoes of her own thoughts. She wandered along the river, searching, heart hammering, and then, just as suddenly as he had disappeared, he reappeared, standing on the dock, eyes fixed on her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Emily," he whispered. "You're beginning to see. See what?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Not everyone who walks the river is of this world," he said softly. "Some of us linger because love, loss, and memory hold us here. And you notice, that is rare," Emily shivered. A part of her wanted to flee, to run from the truth she was beginning to sense. Yet another part, deeper, warmer, and braver, wanted to stay, to understand, to connect with the mysterious figure who had come to inhabit her thoughts so completely. The nights in Savannah seemed to breathe differently now. Emily found herself anticipating the quiet hours more than ever, each step along the cobblestones carrying a mixture of dread and longing. Daniel was always there, waiting or appearing as if from nowhere, his presence simultaneously comforting and unsettling. The riverfront, once a peaceful refuge, had become a stage upon which unseen forces and subtle mysteries played out, and Emily was both participant and observer. Their conversations began to stretch longer, flowing like the river itself. They spoke of trivialities at first, the way fog curled around lampposts, how the water reflected city lights in fractured patterns, the sound of distant music from unseen bars. But gradually, Daniel began sharing stories with depth about Savannah's history and forgotten lives along the river. He spoke of ship captains who never returned from voyages, merchants whose ledgers vanished without trace, and townsfolk who claimed to see figures lingering along the water long after sunset. His voice was soft but full of gravity, and Emily noticed that when he told these stories, his eyes seemed to shimmer with something beyond mere memory. Emily found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't allowed herself in years. She spoke of her heartbreak in Atlanta, of nights spent pacing empty apartments, of a life that had felt too heavy to carry alone. Daniel listened, never interrupting, his gaze steady, his presence unwavering. And slowly, she realized she had begun to care for him deeply, a warmth in her chest that made the night air feel both oppressive and tender. Yet the unease persisted. On more than one occasion, she noticed that his shadow fell differently than expected, or that his reflection in the water lingered for a moment too long. Once, she glimpsed him across the river when he was sitting beside her, a duplicate form, blurred and ethereal. The realization settled over her like cold mist. Daniel was not entirely of this world. Despite this growing certainty, Emily could not stay away. Nights stretched into weeks, and the rhythm of their encounters became an unspoken ritual. She would arrive with her small notebook, sketching the riverfront, the swirling fog, the distant glow of street lamps. Daniel would watch, sometimes offering subtle observations, sometimes sitting silently beside her, letting the quiet stretch between them like a fragile thread. One particularly fog-heavy night, Emily arrived earlier than usual. The air was thick, carrying the scent of river water and damp wood. She found Daniel leaning against the iron railing, watching the water as though tracing invisible patterns. She noticed the fog curling unnaturally around him, as if shielding him from the world, and her chest tightened with a mix of fear and longing. "You seem different tonight," she said softly, approaching. Daniel looked at her, eyes reflecting the dim lamplight. "The river changes with the seasons, and so do those who linger along its banks." Emily swallowed hard. "Do you linger?" He smiled faintly, almost mournfully. "I suppose I do. But it is different when someone notices you, when someone truly sees you." A shiver ran down her spine. His words resonated deeply, and she realized how true it was. No one had ever looked at her with such steady, patient attention. There was a connection here that transcended explanation, a tether between them that felt unbreakable, yet fragile. The nights grew stranger. Small objects along the benches shifted slightly when she wasn't looking, shadows twisted in impossible ways, stretching along cobblestones or curling unnaturally on the river's surface. Whispers floated through the fog, soft and indecipherable, carrying the echo of words half-remembered. Emily began to document these occurrences meticulously, filling her notebook with sketches, notes, and questions. She shared some of them with Daniel, who would nod thoughtfully, sometimes adding cryptic insights. "You notice things others do not," he said one evening, "and because of that, you are here." "Here for what?" Emily asked, though she suspected she already knew. "For understanding, for connection, for love." Emily's heart ached. She had fallen for him, for the warmth, the attention, the quiet intimacy that nights along the river had nurtured. Yet the growing awareness of his ghostly nature made the affection bittersweet. Love for someone who could never fully belong to the world of the living was a cruel, delicate thing. She began visiting local libraries and historical archives during the day, searching for anything that could explain Daniel's presence. Old newspapers, town records, and diaries hinted at a young man named Daniel Hayes, a resident who had vanished along the riverfront over a decade ago. The more Emily read, the more her sense of reality wavered. The city that had once felt safe and familiar now carried the weight of unseen histories and lingering souls. Despite the mounting evidence, Emily clung to the moments they shared. She would walk along River Street, fog swirling around her, her notebook clutched in her hands, anticipating the sight of his figure appearing as if conjured from mist. They would speak, laugh softly, and sit in companionable silence, letting the river carry their shared secrets and unspoken fears. And always, there were subtle hints. The way his eyes glimmered like moonlight on water, the faint ripple that appeared where no wind stirred, the shadow that sometimes split into two and then rejoined, fleeting as memory. One night, the wind carried an unusually strong chill, and the fog was so thick that Emily could barely see the benches ahead. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, heart pounding. When she finally reached their usual spot, Daniel was not there. Her breath caught in her throat, and the river seemed unnaturally still. She called his name, voice trembling, but the only answer was the soft lapping of water and the whisper of the fog. Then she heard it, a soft, familiar whisper curling around her ears. "Emily." She turned. Across the misted water, she saw him, faint and shimmering, almost translucent. He stepped closer, and she felt the cold brush of the fog mingle with warmth she could not explain. "You see me," he said softly. "And because you see me, you are part of this now. Part of the riverfront, the fog, the memories that linger." Emily's mind raced. She wanted to ask questions, to argue, to run, yet she felt rooted in place. Something in the depth of his gaze held her there, suspended between disbelief and longing, reality and the supernatural. That night, the riverfront seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Every ripple, every shadow, every flicker of lamplight carried meaning, and Emily began to understand, in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. The nights she had grown to love were not merely encounters with a man, but a slow unveiling of a truth she could neither fully grasp nor resist. The fog had grown heavier than usual that evening, thick as velvet and almost suffocating in its density. Emily walked along River Street with her notebook clutched tightly in her hands, the pages filled with sketches, observations, and cryptic notes about the riverfront, Daniel, and the strange occurrences she had witnessed. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the soft lapping of water against the docks, and she could feel the tension in her shoulders like a physical weight. She had decided that tonight, she would uncover the truth. For weeks, she had pieced together the whispers of the past, old newspaper clippings, and the stories told by local residents. Every thread pointed to the same conclusion. Daniel Hayes had vanished mysteriously years ago, leaving behind only fragments of a life that had once been ordinary, but was now tethered to the riverfront in a way Emily could barely comprehend. As she neared their usual bench, the fog swirled unnaturally, curling around lampposts and benches like living tendrils. And there he was, Daniel, waiting as always. But tonight there was a difference. His form seemed more fragile, more ephemeral, as if the night itself was struggling to hold him together. "You came," he said softly, stepping closer. The words carried a weight Emily could feel pressing on her chest. "I needed to know," she replied, her voice trembling. "I needed to understand who you really are." Daniel's gaze softened, tinged with sadness. "Some truths are heavy, Emily. They can't be carried lightly." "Then let me carry it," she whispered. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, the fog seemed to retreat, revealing the faint outline of the river and the distant lights of Savannah. "I am not of this world," he said finally, voice barely above the whisper of the river. "I have lingered here, bound to this place, because of a life I could not finish, a love I could not hold, and memories I could not release." Emily's heart pounded. She had suspected it, yet hearing it aloud sent chills racing down her spine. "You're a ghost?" He nodded, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint, melancholy smile. "I lingered in the spaces between life and memory. The river called to me, and when you began noticing me, truly noticing me, it gave me a tether to the living again." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes. Part of her wanted to scream, to run, to reject the impossible truth. But another part, the part that had fallen in love with him, could not move. She reached out, hand trembling, and brushed the faint warmth of his hand. "For weeks, I felt you watching me, guiding me, drawing me in," she said, voice shaking. "I don't care what you are. I care about you." Daniel's eyes glimmered in the lamplight. "And I care for you, Emily, but the river does not forgive attachment lightly. To love me is to risk yourself, to risk becoming part of this place. To love me is to walk the line between life and something beyond." Emily swallowed hard, chest tight with a mixture of fear and longing. "Then I'll walk it. If it means being with you, I'll walk it." The night seemed to still around them. The fog thickened, curling higher, shimmering faintly with unseen light. Emily felt herself drawn closer to Daniel, the air heavy with the scent of salt and old wood, with the whispers of those who had come before. He reached out fully this time, taking her hands in his. "Then you must understand," he said, "that once you step fully into this, there is no turning back. Your presence will linger here as mine has. The river will remember you, and so will I, forever." Emily's heart swelled with both love and terror. She felt the pull of the river beneath her feet, as if it were calling to her, beckoning her to merge with its fog and water, its memories and shadows. She glanced at the distant lights of the city, then back at Daniel, and understood the choice before her. I choose you," she whispered. The moment she spoke the words, a subtle shift occurred. The fog curled around them, the river's surface rippled unnaturally, and Emily felt a strange lightness, as though the boundaries between herself and the night were dissolving. Daniel's form shimmered faintly, more solid than ever before, and he smiled. A smile that was both joyous and sorrowful. "You are mine now," he said softly, "and I am yours. The river has claimed us both, and yet in its embrace, we are together." As the fog enveloped them completely, Emily felt a sense of peace she had never known. The city lights became distant, the sounds of the river softened, and she understood that she had become part of something eternal. A memory, a presence, a whisper carried on the Savannah wind. In the days and nights that followed, Locals occasionally spotted two figures on the same bench along the riverfront. Some swore they saw them gazing at the water, silhouettes entwined, shadows moving as one. Others reported faint whispers carried by the fog, names called softly, laughter mingled with the lapping of the river. No one knew their story, yet the riverfront held a quiet magic, the lingering presence of two souls who had found one another beyond the boundaries of life and death. And somewhere, hidden in the folds of the fog and the ripple of the water, Emily and Daniel remained. Not living, not gone, but together. An eternal love carved into the heart of Savannah, whispered to those who wandered the riverfront at night, waiting for someone who would notice, someone who would see beyond the shadows.